I've just finished testing the Sony 200-600mm lens and wanted to test it against one of the other best available zoom lenses for E Mount in my opinion, the Sigma 150-600mm Sport. In this video, I'll be going over the differences between the two lenses and what I like more about each of them, as well as which one I would recommend to who. Some immediate differences you'll notice between these two lenses are a slight focal length difference in the range and the difference between internal zoom and external zoom. The Sigma 150-600 offers that slightly wider focal length available from the Sony lens that I find useful particularly in wildlife videography, as it helps me get a little wider to set the scenes playing out in nature before popping in close up to the subject. For most people though, I don't know if this is a big deal, and the 200 is probably fine for most scenarios, although it definitely will be more limiting for tight angle landscape shots and even macro. Now when it comes to the internal zoom lens of the Sony 200-600, a lot of people will say that they love that feature about this lens. However, I may be one of the rare people who dislikes this and prefers the external zoom of the Sigma. The reason for that is that when you have mere seconds out in the field, I find it shaves off way more time to zoom in and out, since with the Sigma, you can simply push and pull to achieve different focal lengths, rather than with the Sony having to crank your wrist around to get to the desired focus. I talked a lot about it more in my review that I did on the Sony 200-600, which you can check out after this video in the description below if you're interested. To briefly mention the image stabilization of these lenses, the Sigma 150-600 is a little better than the Sony 200-600. It's hard to find exact specs on Sony depending on what you quote, but the stabilization is roughly around 2 to 3 stops, while the Sigma 150-600 contains 4 stops. Both of these are good for most people in wildlife photography, however, and neither is top of its class. The weight is nearly identical between these two lenses as well, as they both come in close to 4.5 pounds, so almost no difference there. But where there was a huge difference is the minimum focusing distance between these two lenses. While with the Sony the minimum focusing distance is around 7 feet away, the Sigma has a minimum focusing distance of under 2 feet, making it much more useful for macro and essential in those rare times that wildlife comes up extremely close to the photographer. In just a second, we'll be talking about the most important parts of a lens in my opinion, which is the glass quality and image sharpness. But there are some other notable updates that the Sigma 150-600 has that the Sony lacks. Firstly, the Sigma has a proper lens foot on it with an Arca Swiss mount built right in. This is so much more efficient out in the field and effective, rather than dealing with the hassle of screwing on a tripod plate that constantly loosens and flails around. Also, I really disliked how the Sony tripod collar lacks the snapping points on it, so that when you turn the collar, it doesn't snap into place at 90-degree angles like the Sigma. The lens hood on the Sigma is also great, and in my opinion should be standard on any super telephoto lens rather than a lens cap. Not only are lens caps more prone to be falling off constantly, but they can also wind up accidentally scratching the lens in the process. It's also just annoying to have to deal with a cap that's constantly popping off and trying to find it buried in your bag as opposed to a lens hood. The Sigma also has 2 different image stabilization modes built into it, as opposed to only a single one on the Sony. Now for the most important part of all, image quality. When it comes to image quality, it is a very close battle. However, the Sony 200-600 takes the win by just a hair when comparing the two. It's honestly hard to tell the difference, but if I compare them in a controlled setting, the Sony barely won with center sharpness, while I felt like they were just about tied in corner sharpness. Out in the field, it would honestly be incredibly hard to tell the difference, but if you're really pixel peeping, you may be able to tell. The Sony 200-600 does do better with chromatic aberration by a tad as well. In my wildlife photography adventure up in Panoche, I put the lens into some very challenging situations with harsh lighting, and I was amazed to find that I was never able to catch any chromatic aberration in any of my photos, even when pushed to the extremes in their edits. This is pretty amazing for a zoom lens, and I was very impressed by the Sony 200-600 in this capability. So, which lens is right for you? Man, well, after looking at the list, it's honestly very difficult for me to decide a winner. On the one hand, it's a no-brainer that the Sigma 150-600 Sport is a better lens. In almost every single way, it offers better features and functionality than the Sony 200-600. It offers more focus range, zoom range, better stabilization, better build, and better features, and just as fast of an autofocus. However, in the sole category of image quality, the Sony is a little better. Not by a ton, but just enough to make it debatable. Now the question is for me, is the Sony therefore worth $600 more for just a minutely improved IQ? Well, that's hard to justify. I guess if you're a photographer who isn't concerned with budget, or you solely care about the glass quality and have almost no care for the other features in a lens, then I definitely recommend the Sony 200-600 over the Sigma 150-600mm Sport. However, if you're on a tighter budget or you would really find use in any of the other features about the Sigma that I mentioned that are better than the Sony, I'd confidently choose the Sigma for you. I hope this review of the Sigma 150-600mm versus Sony 200-600mm helped. If you want to see my review I did specifically on the Sony 200-600 in much further detail, check out this video here in the end screen that I created today on my main channel. I'll see you guys next time.